Welcome to Nightmares Incorporated, where our goal is to make your sleep anything but restful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, entitled Lake of Fire. As dust settles over the city of Mason, Wyoming, the neon glow of distant traffic lights glimmers across rain-speckled windows, painting streaks of gold and crimson on slick pavement below. Downtown, midnight's hush is broken only by the faint wail of sirens and the lull of passing cars. Inside the compact KBRO studio, DJ Holden Johnson readies himself for another night behind the mic. The walls are adorned with aging concert posters, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, while the battered soundboard is scattered with scribbled playlists, cold coffee, and a lava lamp casting undulating patterns onto the ceiling. Holden's deep, steady voice melts into the ether, rolling from the speakers in bedrooms, gas stations, and diners throughout the city. Welcome, Night Owls, to KBRO, the home of all the greatest grunge rock from the 90s. You're listening to Man in the Box, letting those opening chords burn away the day. The hum of amplifiers pulses beneath his words, and through the glass the blinking on-air sign bathes the room in a reassuring glow. He leans closer to the microphone, eyes flicking to the call board already blinking with anticipation, and continues with a grin. The request lines are open. I want to know who's out there chasing sheep, working the late shift, or just needing a little company tonight. Don't be shy, dial in, share your night, and together let's build the soundtrack that'll carry us through till dawn. Pinned to the wall above his desk, a collage of postcard requests and thank you notes from regular listeners. Midnight Mike, sleepless in Southview, the grunge ghost, reminds Holden he's the voice that keeps the city company long after midnight. As he cues up the next track, the familiar rush of static fills the pauses, and across town listeners reach for their phones, ready to join the chorus of stories that will shape another night on KBRO. The first caller, a woman whose laughter sparkles through the static, remembers spinning beneath the gymnasium lights, her Converse squeaking on the polished floor, the taste of orange soda lingering on her tongue.
Holden, you've gotta play Basket Case. Green Day was the soundtrack for every awkward dance and wild group sing-along in 8th grade,
she says, her voice tinged with the warmth of memory. Holden grins, flipping her record sleeve frayed at the edges, and cueing up the song, letting its jittery chords crash through the quiet hours, echoing in gas stations and late-night diners where the fluorescent lights never sleep. No sooner has the final chorus faded than another call lights up, this time a gravelly voice recalling the smoky haze of a senior year bonfire, sparks drifting up into the ink-black sky, marshmallows roasting, someone's car radio rattling with smashing pumpkins.
Bullet with butterfly wings, man. That was our anthem when we thought the world was against us,
comes the request, nostalgia laced with rebellion. Holden nods, spinning the dial and letting Billy Corgan's snarl thread through the empty streets outside, power chords chasing memories of defiance and laughter beneath the stars. Before the embers of that tune have cooled, another listener, breathless with excitement, requests Jeremy by Pearl Jam.
High school talent show. I was too shy to get up there, but someone sang Jeremy and the whole cafeteria went silent. I never fucking forgot that, man.
The song's haunting bass line and Eddie Vedder's plaintive howl fill the studio, mingling with the soft clink of Holden's coffee mug, the gentle flicker of the lava lamp, and the distant patter of nighttime rain against the window. As the night deepens, the playlist dances between old scars and brighter recollections, each track a bridge to someone's past. In the studio, Holden lets the music carry him and the city forward. The requests a gentle tide washing over KBRO, stitching together sleepless souls with the steady pulse of guitars and memories. The flow is easy, the night is long, but the soundtrack endures, drifting through the city like a secret current, connecting strangers in the hush before dawn. After the first couple of hours or so, when the initial rush of requests slows down a little, and car tires whisper over drenched pavement, the studio phone flashes again. Holden wipes a palm across his brow, the first couple of hours making the booth feel both intimate and infinite. The voice on the line introduces itself as Daryl, the name hanging in the air with a peculiar resonance. There's a cadence in Daryl's tone, a familiar timbre that prickles Holden's memory, as if the sound has threaded through his dreams or haunted some forgotten hallway of the past.
Hey, Holden, I want to make a dedication,
Daryl says, his words precise and deliberate as though he's practiced them.
Could you play Lake of Fire for Alicia?
Holden pauses, fingers curled above the console. The lights of the mixing board reflect in his mug as he tries to place the voice, but it flips away like wet gravel beneath his feet. It's the request that hooks him, a strange unease settling in the pit of his stomach. Lake of Fire for Alicia. The combination stirs something unspoken, a peculiar heaviness, and for a split second an image darts into his mind. A door, painted a deep, impossible red, its wood grain glistening in the neon glow just outside the studio window. The vision holds, sharp and surreal, before dissolving in the wake of Daryl's patient silence. Forcing a steadying breath, Holden manages a practiced radio smile. You got it, Daryl. This one's for Alicia. He lifts the needle, and the first aching notes of Lake of Fire drift from the turntable, curling through the studio and out into the night. The song's stark, haunted melody seeps into the city's quiet corners, echoing in the hum of vending machines at the late-night laundromat, in the soft shudder of solitary elevators, in the flicker of porch lights waiting to welcome someone home. For a moment, Holden's hand lingers above the fader, the sound of rain growing louder, mingling with the music's somber refrain. As the track plays, Holden glances up at his wall of postcards, a collage of gratitude and confessions, and wonders why Daryl's request unsettles him so. The memory of that red door lingers, tinged with a sense of unfinished business, and the studio feels smaller, shadows thickening at the edges. Where do bad folks go when they die? Across town, perhaps Alicia hears her name floating through the static, caught between memory and midnight, the city quietly listening as Lake of Fire cries out into the void. They don't go to heaven where the angels fly. Why did he think of a red door? Had he seen one of such a deep crimson that it had stuck in his memory for some reason? Go to a lake of fire and fry. Kurt Cobain continues in a haunting melancholy, forcing Holden to think of a lost soul wandering through the depths of purgatory, looking for a sanctuary that they would never find. As the plaintive echo of Lake of Fire fades, the studio seems to exhale, a hush settling in after the song's final lingering note. Holden, still weighed down by the music's somber gravity, selects a playlist meant to cushion the next hour with familiar warmth, a mosaic of top 20s, tunes that raged against the establishment, and ballads that glow like embers in the dark. The red and green lights on the control board pulse softly, like distant stars blinking through the rain-streaked window. He shrugs on his battered denim jacket, pockets jingling with loose change and the keys to the station, and steps outside. The heavy studio door closes behind him with a click that rings out into the silence. Outside, the world is rinsed clean by recent rain, the air cool and tinged with petrichor. Holden breathes in deeply, letting the night fill his lungs and soften the anxious static in his chest. Perched atop a hill, the radio station is surrounded by tangled underbrush and tall grass, wavering slightly in the gentle wind. The antennae cast their faint red glow over the lot, and the city sprawls below. Clusters of street lights smudged by mist, headlights threading between shadowy warehouses, the distant shimmer of the river reflecting neon signs and moonlight. Holden leans against the railing, fingertips numbed by the cold metal, and tries to lose himself in the panorama. Somewhere below, the hum of traffic and the odd bark of a dog punctuate the stillness. A sudden sound, a subtle rustling from the brambles at the edge of the property, breaks his reverie. The movement is quick and deliberate. Brush shaking as something unseen navigates its way through. Holden straightens, heart slightly thumping with a cocktail of caution and curiosity. He squints into the gloom, half expecting to catch a glint of eyes or the flash of fur. For several seconds, the only sound is the distant thrum of the city and his own breath, sharp in the night air. He tells himself it's nothing more than a raccoon. A fox, maybe even an owl, swooping low over the grass, hunting for mice. The woods here are alive with nocturnal life, and the isolated hilltop invites all manner of creatures. Still, an uneasy feeling creeps up his spine, a sense of being watched. Shaking off the chill, Holden forces a wry smile. "Probably just a squirrel," he mutters, voice swallowed by the wind. He waits a moment longer, gathering courage as the breeze tugs at his hair, then turns back toward the haven of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of the playlist. The hallway is thick with the scent of warm electronics and old vinyl. As he settles into his chair and slips on his headphones, the strains of Black Hole Sun wrap around him, soothing but unable to fully erase the lingering tension. Another hour crawls by, the booth awash in flickering console lights and distant thunder from the speakers. Holden fields a handful of requests, grunge anthems from the mid-90s, each song a weathered relic, distorted guitars humming through the static of midnight. The names blur together: Temple of the Dog, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. Drizzle beads on the window beside him, catching neon from the lot, painting rainbows across his forearm. Gradually, Holden feels the tension ease from his shoulders, his earlier apprehension dissolving into routine. The hush of the studio, the low hum of the playlist cycling from one track to the next, becomes a balm. He tells himself the strange rustling and the prickle of unease were nothing, a trick of the wind, a moment's vulnerability. But just as the night settles, the hotline blinks red again, a lone pulse in the gloom. Holden picks up, expecting static and sleep-heavy voices, and instead hears Daryl's familiar cadence, drawling and deliberate.
"Hey there again, Holden. Still hanging in there? Got another one for Alicia tonight. Linger by the Cranberries."
Daryl stays on the line for a moment longer, nostalgia thick in his words. He starts reminiscing, his voice weaving through the years. Bus rides in the early 1990s, laughter muffled in the morning fog, the jangle of cassette tapes and the relentless grind of school days.
"You remember those rides, don't you? Everyone was glued to their Walkmans, trying to pretend the bus wasn't a moving prison. The song played like almost every day in the afternoon. I remember all the guys on the bus pretended not to like it, calling it a sappy girl song. But we were lying, weren't we? And it was miles better than hearing Sugar Ray every day in high school and Intro to Business like clockwork. Still gets stuck in my head, man.
Daryl's laugh is low, a ripple of shared memory. Holden nods, even though Daryl cannot see him. The past crowds in. The dull linoleum of the classroom, the rattling windows, the tang of cheap cologne and pencil shavings. The song, every morning there's a halo hanging from the corner of my girlfriend's four-post bed. Always on repeat, a soundtrack to adolescent boredom, echoes within his head. Holden is unsettled by how vivid the memories are, how easily Daryl's words conjure faces and moments half forgotten.
It's funny how music does that.
Daryl muses, voice soft, almost wistful.
Pulls you right back, whether you want it to or not.
Holden's fingers freeze over the playlist, feeling an inexplicable chill as he flicks the stylus across the vinyl. The first notes of Linger bloom in the speakers, delicate and mournful. As Dolores O'Riordan's voice floats through the wires, Holden is seized by a strange recollection. A red door, or was it just a flare of light behind it? The image slides into his mind, unsettling in its clarity, then slips away again like water through his fingers. Holden's grip stays tight around the receiver, long after Daryl has gotten off the line. The weight of recollection pressing in. It's more than just the songs. The memories arrive tinged with something stranger, threading old echoes through the static. Holden wonders, not for the first time, if this isolated hilltop station is more than just a haven for insomniac callers and fading tunes. Perhaps it's a conduit, a place where memory and melody entwine, keeping the past alive in the soft glow of the monitors. Romantic bullshit or not, he finds this sometimes an appealing thought. He lets Linger play out, watching mist swirl against the glass, as O'Riordan's voice drifts over the city below. Holden sits in the half-dark, suspended in the hush between transmissions, haunted by memories he can't quite explain, and the quiet certainty that not all listeners are as distant as they seem. Holden sat there in silence, the last tremulous notes of Linger dissolving into static, an ache echoing in their wake. The studio was a cocoon of shadows and electronic hum, the amber glow of the lamp spilling across stacks of weathered records and empty coffee cups. Outside, the mist curled against the glass, obscuring the city lights and making the world feel smaller, as if the station hovered at the edge of something vast and unknown. He found himself listening not just for the next song, but for the faintest creak or shifting of air, signs that he was not, in fact, alone in the building. The unease gnawed at him, but it was tinged with a kind of embarrassed amusement. He could almost see a few of his friends, grinning conspiratorially, huddled around a phone or a radio, delighting in his late-night jitters. The memories Daryl conjured had felt so personal, so eerily precise, that Holden's suspicion grew. How else could the caller have known about that song, that particular classroom, those tiny markers of a life half buried by time? It had to be someone he knew, weaving his past together with sly improvisation, turning nostalgia into a ghost story for the graveyard shift. Hell, it was probably why Daryl sounded so familiar to him. He let out a quiet laugh, the sound soft and unsteady in the space. "Nice try," he murmured into the emptiness. imagining the laughter on the other end of the line, the muffled hush of a prank in progress. You had me, I'm not gonna lie. You really had me going there for a moment. But the jig is up, my friend. The edges of fear blurred into anticipation. He looked forward to the next call, the next twist in the game. He pictured how he'd handle it. The playful challenge in his voice, the teasing accusation, the moment when the pranksters gave themselves away with a slip or a snicker. Until then, every shadow in the studio, every low note and flicker of static, seemed to be charged with possibility. Holden sat back, feeling the pulse of the station beneath his palms, waiting for Daryl to return and the secret to unravel beneath the midnight frequencies. Half an hour drifted by in the radio studio's blue-lit half-dark, the vinyl records glimmering on their shelves, the red on-air sign humming softly above Holden's head. Even the faint drone of the air conditioner seemed to exaggerate the quiet, stretching each second, each heartbeat. Holden filled the silence with idle doodles on a notepad, a jagged mountain, a crooked house, his pen tapping a restless rhythm, the echo resonating through the empty studio. When the phone finally rang, an abrupt electric jolt in the hush, he answered with a practiced warmth and a teasing edge. "Do we got a new caller on the line, or is that you again, Daryl? If that is your real name. By the way, who put you up to this? Which one of my buddies wanted to give me a scare tonight? Was it Greg? Feels like something he'd cook up." There was a pause, weighted and intentional. Then Daryl's voice slipped through the static, almost lazy.
"Greg?"
He echoed, an amused smirk audible through the wires.
"Holden, you don't have any friends. I'd put $1,000 on that. Hell, I'd bet you don't even know someone named Greg. Unless you mean Greg Sanders. The Greg Sanders who died of an overdose in 2003. Too much green jelly, that one. You remember green jelly, don't you?"
The name hit Holden like a slap of cold water. Green jelly. He could see the lurid foil packet, the way Greg's hands shook as he tore it open at a party bathed in sodium-yellow streetlight. 4 folded 20s in Holden's hand as the sale was complete. A sour taste rose in his throat. That night, the ambulance lights, someone screaming for help, Greg's laughter wild and unsteady, echoing in some forgotten stairwell. He gripped the receiver a little tighter. The chill of memory swept over him, prickling his skin. How could Daryl know this? That detail had never left the corridors of his own mind, or maybe at most the circle who'd been there that night. Daryl pressed on, his words quieter now, more deliberate.
"You do remember green jelly, right, Holden?"
The question hung, heavy and oppressive, in the studio's neon gloom. It felt less like a question, and more like an unspoken accusation, like someone fingering the loose threads of a life, waiting for something to unravel.
"It was made out of NyQuil pills, right?"
Daryl continued.
"You injected the stuff into them. Isn't that how it worked? And who measured that shit? Who had the time? Just cook it up in the bathtub, get a partial syringe full, inject and sell, right, man? Just having a good time."
Daryl's voice barreled on, growing relentless and mildly savage.
"Just party and rock every night, right, Holden? Just sling that shit for $60 a pop and have a good time. And if some people die, if they overdose on that toxic shit you cooked up in your bathroom and choke on their own vomit as they sleep, who cares, right? That's just the cost of doing business. Live hard, die young, right, Holden?" "How many people do you think died from that shit before it was scraped off the streets?"
Holden's eyes darted to the corners of the room, the shelves lined with old tapes, the posters peeled back at the edges. For a moment, the studio seemed to shrink around him, the familiar comforts now fraught with secrets. The game had changed. The rules were rewritten without his consent. Daryl's knowledge dug deeper than a prank, into old wounds, into secrets Holden had tried to bury. He saw the door within his mind again. The red door. No, a door with a red light behind it. A red light bulb. It was a fucking red light bulb. And behind the door, a burning curiosity mingles with dread. He wanted to know who was behind the voice, and how far they would go. The studio's silence was no longer gentle. It throbbed with tension, every flicker of static on the airwaves a possible clue, or a warning. "Yes, I remember green jelly," Holden said, his mouth dry. "And you can't cuss on the radio, Daryl. Green jelly was terrible, you're right, and everyone is better off now that it's gone."
Well, the fuckers who died certainly aren't better off,
Daryl said, a sardonic grin audible in his voice. "Do you have another song request, Daryl?" Holden asked. Outside, the world was velvet black, and inside his head, old nights flickered to life. Alleyways slick with rain and neon, voices rasping deals that tasted like metal and adrenaline. He remembered faces half lit by street lamps, hands exchanging crumpled bills, the stench of sweat and fear mingling in the cold air. But always, always that red light. Sometimes it blinked behind a door, and sometimes it flooded a single room with garish, suspicious colors. The red was a warning, a promise, a secret kept out of sight. Behind that door, memory blurred, a voice, crooning low and strange, threading through the darkness like smoke. It had sung to him. A song half remembered, half fantasy, threading through the terror and excitement of those lost hours. The melody was warped but oddly soothing, a lullaby for the damned. Holden's breath came shallow, the studio cocooning him in a sterile, humming silence. Daryl's voice still hung in the air, but it was the phantom singing that lingered, drawing him back to a time when survival meant making choices in the shadows, when every deal was a gamble with fate. The red light behind the door burned on, pulsing with questions Holden was afraid to answer. After what seemed like an eternity within his own mind, Daryl spoke again.
"Yeah, I do. One more song and I'll leave you alone for the night. Play God's Gonna Cut You Down by Johnny Cash."
Holden's mouth suddenly felt like it was filled with sandpaper. "No," he said at once, not even putting on his fake radio smile. "I like the Man in Black as much as the next guy," Holden followed up, trying to remember that he was still on air. "But this is a 90s grunge rock station, Daryl. We don't play Johnny Cash."
"Oh, pretty please, Holden,"
the voice on the other end of the line crooned.
"Pretty please with a couple of poison little pills on top."
"No," Holden said, his entire body growing cold. "And don't call here again."
"Okay,"
Daryl replied mildly.
"I guess you don't give me much of a choice. I'll just have to come down there and play it myself."
The line went dead before Holden could respond. He stared at the receiver for a long, silent moment, his heart thudding with a heavy, arrhythmic insistence. The words echoed in his mind. "I'll just have to come down there and play it myself." He glanced at the clock. It was after midnight. The city outside dissolved into shadow and drizzle. Swallowing hard, Holden forced a breath, trying to steady his nerves. He flicked on the studio mic, his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted the volume. "Oh, well, folks, sometimes you get callers who are a little, let's say, off-kilter. That's part of the magic here in the midnight hour, right?" His chuckle was hollow, but he trusted the static and distortion to mask it. Anyway, let's get back to music. Here's a playlist to keep the night rolling. He hit play, flooding the booth with the comfort of distorted guitars and cracked vocals, the sounds that usually made him feel invincible behind the glass. Tonight, though, every riff sounded sharper, every lyric a reminder of the tension pressing against him. As the music played, Holden snatched up the phone and dialed 911. Pressing the digits with a shaky urgency. Nothing, just a faint, pulseless hum, broken by the distant echo of feedback. He hung up and tried again, his breathing becoming faster. The line was dead, as empty as the studio around him. He glanced nervously at the old analog phone resting in the corner, tried it too. Only static. An icy prickle traced its way down his spine. Holden stood, grabbing his keys from the cluttered desk, and walked with measured haste to the front entrance. The lobby was dim, lit only by the flickering neon sign outside. He checked the lock, then slid the heavy metal bar into place, leaving fingerprints on the cold surface. Down the hall, past posters of long-defunct bands and shelves stacked with demo tapes, Holden made his way to the back door. He paused, listening for any sound beyond the muffled throb of music, then checked the bolt once, twice, his hand lingering as he pushed against the door to ensure it held firm. Returning to the booth, Holden kept his eyes fixed on the security monitors. The black and white screens flickered with grainy images of the parking lot and entryway. He turned up the volume, bathing the room in the relentless thrum of grunge, the music now less a comfort and more a shield. Outside, the night pressed up against the windows, thick with possibility and threat. Holden sat, adrenaline thrumming through his veins, and waited, listening for footsteps, and outside, the rain began to fall again. Holden sequestered himself within the glass cocoon of the DJ booth, shutting the door tight, twisting the old latch until it bit into its groove with a metallic click. The booth, usually a sanctuary, felt smaller tonight, its walls pressing in as the city's neon glow struggled against the rain-streaked darkness outside. Each time the fluorescent overhead flickered, the shadows on the other side of the glass seemed to ripple and shudder, turning the window into a shifting tableau of anxious reflections. The air inside was cold and faintly metallic, tinged with the ghost scent of burnt coffee and electrical ozone from the equipment. He snapped off the remaining overhead light, plunging the booth into a dim, blue-tinged gloom where only the monitors and the mixing board glowed, a constellation of tiny LEDs pulsing like worried hearts. He knelt below the window's edge, heart pounding so loudly he half expected it to bleed through the speakers. The music he'd chosen, a relentless thrum of distorted guitars, seemed to vibrate through the floor and into his bones. But even that thunderous shield couldn't drown out the subtle noises that crept in. A squeak as the building settled, the gentle patter and hiss of rain on the roof, the faint whine of wind through the trees. Every few seconds, Holden dared a glance. There, by the far window, a fleeting flutter, a suggestion of movement just beyond the reach of the flickering neon sign. He squinted, pressing his forehead lightly against the cool glass. The parking lot outside was a mosaic of rain-smeared reflections, broken by quivering shadows. Was it the wind nudging a stray newspaper across the asphalt, or something else? He caught sight of a brief, jerky silhouette, human, animal, or a trick of the light, faltering and vanishing the instant he tried to focus. Holden pressed his back against the wall, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles ached. The music played on, but every lyric seemed hollow, every riff edged with anxiety. Static filled the spaces between songs, crackling in his headphones, while the silence outside pressed up against the booth's glass, a mute, insistent presence. He tried to steady his breathing, counting seconds between each cautious inhale. Every creak in the hallway, every tap of rain against the window felt amplified, unnatural, as if the entire building had become an extension of his own nerves. He resisted the urge to speak again on the mic. The notion of broadcasting his fear felt both absurd and dangerous, as if voicing it might invite the night's presence closer. Instead, he stared at his own pale reflection, superimposed over the uncertain world outside. His eyes, wide and unblinking, flicked back and forth, tracking the darkness for any sign, a raised hand, a glint of metal, a face peering in. A sudden heavier thump outside made Holden flinch, his breath catching in his throat. He listened, counting the seconds of quiet, unsure whether what he'd heard was real or imagined. The night pressed in. In the booth, Holden waited, every muscle taut, listening for footsteps in the rain, for a voice to break the silence, for the next hint that he was not alone. Yet it was a bang on the front door that shattered the silence, the sound of a battering ram slamming into the thick oaken doors. The bang came again, sharp, forceful, reverberating through the floor, shaking dust from the doorframe. Holden froze, every part of him braced for flight, but the sound repeated, insistent, a triplet of blows that demanded his attention. He swallowed, pulse throbbing in his ears. For a moment he tried to convince himself it must be some late-night delivery, or a prank, something ordinary. But the hour was wrong, and the tempo of the pounding was far from casual. His hand found the edge of the desk again, steadying himself as he rose. The world narrowed, the monitors and consoles shrinking behind him as he moved, step by slow step, toward the door at the far end of the corridor. The music faded to a dull, distant throb as he slipped through the blue shadows, his footsteps muffled by the thin, stained carpet. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving rain in sheets against the windows. Each flash of neon stuttered through the glass, painting the hallway in nervous, shape-shifting colors. The pounding came again, duller now, as if whoever, whatever was out there, was wearing through their resolve or their patience. At last, Holden reached the front door. He pressed himself flat against the wall, heart hammering, and inched his face close to the narrow pane of glass set beside the door. His breath condensed in a small, frantic cloud on the cold surface as he peered into the night. Nothing. Only the vacant lot, wet with rain and lit by fractured neon. The streetlight beyond flickered uncertainly, catching on puddles, hinting at the possibility of shapes just out of sight. Holden's eyes searched for movement, anything that might betray a prankster or an intruder, scanning the empty scene until his vision blurred. He waited, counting heartbeats. The night was still now, save for the relentless tap of rain and the whine of distant traffic. Holden's knuckles whitened where they gripped the doorframe. He wasn't sure if he felt relief or disappointment at the emptiness beyond the glass. Then from the other side of the door came a slow, deliberate scrape. Metal against metal, low and intimate, as if something was tracing the outline of the lock. Holden gasped. He leaned in, straining to see, but the window offered nothing but his own frightened reflection. Twin circles of eyes wide in the rain-shadowed dark. Shuddering, Holden tore his eyes from the blank, rain-streaked window. The scrape at the lock finished with a decisive click that echoed through the halls. A sound that felt oddly final, like a warning sealed behind steel. He jerked back, nerves sparking with panic, and with trembling urgency he hurried away from the front door, heart pounding a staccato against his ribs. The passage back toward the DJ booth was a gauntlet of shadows, every familiar shape now monstrous and looming in the jittery dark. Holden's mind raced. Had something gotten inside? Was it already threading the hallways, hunting him amid the tangled wires and blinking consoles of the station? He pressed onward, letting the phantom comfort of the DJ booth be his lighthouse. The faint smell of hot plastic grew stronger as he moved, promising sanctuary, a world of sliders and switches and the illusion of control. But as Holden rounded the final corner, he stopped dead. The hallway before him had transformed. Sickly, garish red light bled from fixtures overhead, leaking down the walls and pooling in uneven puddles across the light-colored carpet. The floor appeared to have become a river of blood. And there, poised midway between Holden and the booth, stood a figure, motionless, shrouded in shadow except where the red light licked its outline. Holden's breath snagged in his throat. The figure's head tilted, almost curious, and then with a shuffling step it advanced. The crimson light partially revealed its face, pale and leathery, stretched taut over angular bones, with ragged patches of hair clinging to a mottled scalp. Its suit, a relic from a past decade, hung in tatters, sodden with grave dirt. Its hands, curled into claws, dangled at its sides, nails blackened and broken. A stench of decay rolled down the hallway. Earth, mildew, something darker. Holden's stomach knotted, but he couldn't look away. Clouded eyes fixed on him with an ancient, unyielding intent. The thing opened its mouth, and the world seemed to hold still. From its lips came not a growl or a moan, but a low melodic song, voice thick with earth and memory. The melody floated in the air, impossibly sweet and yet suffused with sorrow. A lullaby from beneath the ground, woven with lost words and the echo of decades. You can run on for a long time, run on for a long time, run on for a long time, but sooner or later God'll cut you down, sooner or later God'll cut you down. The silhouette moved forward, footfalls slow and deliberate, the song growing stronger with each step. The red light pulsed in time with the music, painting the corridor with shifting shadows that danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that seemed to reach for Holden, beckoning him closer. Holden's leg refused to obey, rooting him in place. He felt the music crawling along his skin, cold and electric, each note burrowing deeper, tangling with fear and fascination. His eyes locked on the singer, who advanced another pace, voice rising in a mournful crescendo. A tremor ran through the walls, and with a wet, shuddering sound they began to yield. Crumbling plaster, sloughing wallpaper, and behind them the shapes of more dead emerged, as if conjured by the song itself. Limbs tangled and twisted, their bodies sagging with rot and the weight of too many seasons. But their faces, oh, their faces, some blurred by decay, some eerily intact, flickered with fragments of memory. Holden recognized them in flashes. An old friend's gentle eyes eclipsed by ruin. A neighbor's smile now a crooked grimace. The familiar made monstrous, all falling in behind his initial visitor. Their voices joined the lead singers, weaving into the melody, a haunting, many-throated chorus that bounced off the walls and filled the hallway with the sound of inevitability.
Well, you may throw your rock, hide your hand, working in the dark against your fellow man. But as sure as God made black and white, what's done in the dark will be brought to the light.
The red light flickered and deepened, painting each advancing figure in strokes of blood and shadow. They moved in uncanny synchrony, song growing more powerful, each word thudding against Holden's heart like a warning bell. Holden's paralysis shattered. With a gasp, he spun on his heel and stumbled down the corridor, shoes scraping against grimy carpet. Behind him rose the thunder of pursuit, dozens of feet slapping, dragging, pounding, a relentless tide. The song transformed into a chant, growing louder and less melodic, rhythmic and merciless, chasing him through the twisting shadows and the labyrinth of memory and dread. Holden ran, lungs burning, pulse roaring in his ears, the front door suddenly impossibly far away, the past and future surging behind him, voices and footsteps promising that no one outruns what waits beneath the ground. Holden burst through the radio station's front door, the air outside impossibly sharp and clean compared to the stifling gloom within. He barely registered the outline of his car, sitting mute and useless at the curb, headlights dim against the roiling dark. Instinct propelled him past it entirely, down the scraggly hill whose grass had grown wild and unkempt since the last time he'd cared to notice. He ran, arms pumping, the slap of his heels against the earth echoing the chorus still churning in his mind. Each stride was a negotiation with pain. His hips flared with heat, the joints raw and uncertain, knees threatening to buckle beneath the strain of panic and years spent hunched at a desk or behind locked doors. His lungs clawed for breath, not the shallow, brittle gasps of fear, but something deeper, as if the act of running had awakened a memory in his body. A reminder of how long he'd been idle, how much he'd let rust and gather dust. The ache was relentless. With every step, Holden felt the hollow of time, how his body remembered the neglect, the decades of comfort and cowardice. He staggered, legs trembling, the world around him blurring at the edges. The radio station receded behind him, and with it the chorus of the dead, yet their voices seemed to cling to him, dragging invisible fingers down his spine, whispering in the throb of his pulse. The hill stretched before him like a trail, its descent both promise and threat, and Holden pressed on, forcing his failing body to remember what it meant to flee, what it meant to survive. He reached the bottom of the hill and collapsed, his body folding into the damp grass as if he had always belonged there. The earth was cold and marshy beneath him, moisture soaking through his clothes and chilling his skin until he shivered, curled up and small. Blades of grass pressed against his face, slick with dew and the faint scent of mud and rotting leaves. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale bringing the sharp tang of petrichor and distant smoke, each exhale a tremble of exhaustion. Holden's hands sprawled before him, palms sinking into the loam. At first he barely registered their shape, but as his vision cleared, he saw the knotted veins, the deep, unfamiliar wrinkles, nails yellowed and split. They looked impossibly old, hands that had toiled in fields, hands that remembered grief. The sight filled him with disbelief and dread, as if time had rushed forward and stolen more than moments. The pain inside him deepened, radiating from his hips and knees into his spine and jaw. Every tooth throbbed with a rotten ache, a sour taste blooming in his mouth as if decay had settled there overnight. His gums felt swollen, his teeth loose, and when he tried to cry out, the sound that broke from his lips was frail and battered, a voice worn thin by years of sorrow and silence. The cry echoed through the mist, swallowed by the hush and the distant rumble of thunder. For a long moment, Holden lay in the wet grass, heart hammering against his ribs, face streaked with tears and sweat. The world around him seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against his limbs, heavy with memory. He could hear, faintly, the chorus lingering, a whisper in the wind, a chill down his spine, a reminder that some things never truly leave. Slowly, with burning legs and trembling resolve, Holden forced himself upright. His muscles screamed, calves knotting into cramps, thighs shaky and unreliable. Each movement felt like a negotiation, the fire in his joints threatening to snuff out his will. When he finally turned to look back up the hill, the radio station stood in grotesque silence. Its walls sagged, brick crumbling away in chunks, windows shattered and gaping. The antenna atop the roof leaned at a precarious angle, tangled in vines that crawled like grasping fingers. The sign, once bright and promising, now hung by a single rusted chain, letters faded to illegibility. The parking lot was a wasteland of weeds and broken concrete, the only light a flicker of lightning above. Holden stared at the ruin, the building forsaken and hollow, a shell stripped of pride and purpose. It was clear that no one had tended to it in years, perhaps decades. Nature reclaiming what was left, ivy crawling in through every crack, the air itself thick with the scent of mold and abandonment. He stood there, wind tugging at his clothes, the ache in his bones and teeth echoing the desolation before him. There was no sign of pursuit now, just the old, persistent song in his memory. The station's ruin called forth memories Holden could neither halt nor soften. They rose up, sharp and unbidden, searing in their clarity, the ache of the present echoed by the fractures of the past. He saw it all as it once was. He saw it from the outside. He saw 3 children, shoes muddied and laughter echoing down the streets of Mason, all the way up to KBRO radio station, which in those days was the home of classic rock found on 97.3 FM. 3 inseparable kids, running through the woods near the station, creeping into old buildings that had been condemned. Daryl always leading, grinning wide, pockets stuffed with pilfered gum and marbles. Alicia, her hair always coming loose, daring them into attics and long-abandoned basements, her voice bright with challenge and possibility. Holden was always cautious, trailing in their wake, heart thundering with every forbidden step. Over the years, the town transformed, and so did they. The games faded as adolescence crept in, as secrets grew between them like cracks in plaster. He could see a November night, fog curling low over the fields, when Holden and Alicia first kissed behind the transmitter shed, the air shivering with static and hope. Their hands fumbled, shy and honest. The future was something they imagined together, spun from midnight confessions and gentle, awkward promises. By the time they reached college, they were sometimes referred to as the three amigos by their neighbors, thick as thieves they were. Holden and Alicia, the picture-perfect young suburban high school sweethearts, and Daryl, the perennial third wheel. During their first winter break at UW, there was a party thrown by a guy Alicia had met at her job, a guy who supposedly ran with a rougher crowd and threw some memorable ragers. Christmas lights strung across sagging ceilings, the walls sweating with music and bodies. Daryl laughing too loudly in the kitchen, clutching a red cup. Alicia's eyes glassy and distant, searching for escape in every shadow. Holden had left early, pleading fatigue, unaware that the night would unspool without him. He hadn't known, not then, what Daryl had pressed into Alicia's palm, or the pact they sealed with bravado and a hunger for oblivion. Both Daryl and Alicia had walked out of that party with a monkey on their backs. They didn't know it at the time, of course. At the time, it was just a bit of fun, trying something new, and the monkey always starts small. But before long, that monkey grows into a full-blown gorilla, one that is hungry and won't be denied. The truth grew in secret, twisting through nights and months, Alicia and Daryl vanishing together more and more, their smiles brittle, their stories thin. Holden, slow to suspicion, blamed distance and time, never daring to see the hollow blooming behind their eyes. Now, with the station gutted before him, the weight of those years pressed down, grief for what had broken, not just in bricks and beams, but in trust, in friendship, in love. Memory was merciless. It offered no comfort, only the endless echo of what once was and what could not be reclaimed. He sees it all now with a clarity that scalds, with an indifference that sets him outside. How Daryl and Alicia had begun slipping away together in shadows that Holden never thought to search. It hadn't been malice, not really. Their secret had knotted them together, urgent and heavy, more powerful than old loyalties or childish love. Holden seemed not to notice the way their voices dropped when he entered a room, the glances traded like surreptitious signals, a current passing between them that he could not intercept. That secret, buried beneath months of strained laughter and unfinished sentences, surfaced the night everything broke. He sees it as though through cracked glass. Daryl frantic, white-knuckled, the panic in his eyes barely masked by bravado. Alicia, too pale in the flickering light, her body slack as if the world had loosened its grip on her. The room had been red, a light bulb that Alicia enjoyed, Lake of Fire by Nirvana howling through the speakers in her room. That had been the scene when she overdosed. Daryl had watched the color drain from her face, had felt the weight of consequences pressing in. Fear, raw and primal, drove him to run, away from the wreckage, away from the sirens rising in the distance, away from responsibility. In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to rearrange itself around absence, a silence that pressed into every corner of the world. The apartment that he had lived in became a dark, lonely escape. His time with the drug that had killed Alicia was over, but his time with the drink that banishes memory was just beginning. He had drifted through days that bled into one another, each morning opening with the pale gray of clouded dawn and closing on the same mute twilight. the ache of loss settling deeper with each turn of the clock. Darrell began sending Holden messages that would arrive at odd hours, first as terse apologies, then fragmenting into confessions, each one a splintered attempt to navigate the guilt that shadowed them both. When Darrell finally phoned, his voice was thin, the words tumbling out in a stuttering rush. I need to see you. I can't, Holden. I need to talk. I'm sorry. Something in the desperation threaded through the static made Holden agree. Darrell came on the last Thursday of September. Mason was in the grip of a sharp early frost. The dusk settled early, turning streetlights into shimmering halos against the encroaching dark. He arrived bundled in a battered parka, eyes sunken, the swagger that once drew crowds now stripped to raw humility. The door had been unlocked. The apartment was nearly dark, but for the thin spill of amber light from the kitchen, pooling across the battered floorboards. Following the sound of music coming from Holden's room, Darrell had crossed the small living area, opening the door and finding his friend sitting cross-legged upon the floor. Johnny Cash had been playing through the speakers. "Tell the rambler, the gambler, the backbiter." Darrell had tried to speak, voice wavering, but words failed, dissolving into a rush-strangled sound that might have been a sob. Holden had only watched him, seeming to search Darrell's face for the boy he'd once followed through sunlit afternoons and midnight adventures. In that dim room, the cold seeped in, and with it came the memories. Alicia's smile, the hollow in her absence, the night that had unraveled them all. Outside, the wind scraped along the window panes, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and frost. It was at that point that Darrell had seen the pistol in Holden's hand. A pistol that had been pointed towards him since he walked through the door, only unseen because he was wrapped in his own misery and guilt. Darrell had raised his hands defensively, muttered a quick and nearly incoherent apology. Holden had remained silent, his cold blue eyes locked upon Darrell's. He then joined his voice to the final bar of the song's chorus. "You tell 'em the God's gonna cut you down." And then in one mercilessly smooth motion, Holden had placed the barrel of the pistol under the shelf of his own chin. Darrell had screamed and tried to run towards him. The report had been deafening. The flash, the crashing noise, the flash of red, red, always red, all there is red. Afterward, silence became Darrell's only companion. The world went on, a relentless, indifferent tide, while he drifted, anchorless in his grief. He could not bear the weight of condolences or the gentle, well-meaning hands that sought to comfort him. Their touch scalded. Their words were foreign, echoing against the walls of his isolation. The blame curled around his heart and squeezed until there was nothing left but bitterness and the need to forget. So he let college slip away, attending classes in body but never in mind, until the effort itself unraveled. He drank to dull the sound of the gunshot lodged within his skull, to blur the edges of memory and night. Soon the bottle was not enough, and Darrell found himself on street corners in cities he could not name, selling green jelly. Poison, he knew, but necessity has a way of making monsters of the desperate. Each deal was a coin flipped into the wishing well of oblivion, the faces of those he harmed merging with Holden's in his haunted sleep. He wandered the long veins of America, hitching rides with strangers, never staying, never belonging. Motels, alleys, the rain-soaked benches became his world, while the landscape of his past receded. Eventually, there was nowhere left to run but home. Mason's streets had not changed, but Darrell had. His shoulders bent, his eyes shadowed, a stranger among familiar ghosts. Alone and hollowed out, he found himself standing beneath the same window panes where the wind still whispered of wood smoke and frost, and the red memory behind his eyes refused to fade. He remembered how he had found the radio station, the squat brick relic on the edge of town, its windows filmed with dust, and its sign so sun-bleached the letters had nearly vanished. Inside, the silence had been thick, a silence that pressed against his ribs and yet offered a strange comfort, as if the ghosts there were content to leave him undisturbed. He dragged in an old cot, sagging in the center, and made it his bed beneath the cracked glass and cobwebbed rafters. What little food he could scrounge, cans of beans, stale crackers, the occasional bruised apple, he stacked behind the soundboard, as though the machinery might somehow guard these humble treasures. And there was always the bottle, amber or clear, bought with crumpled bills earned from unloading trucks, sweeping sidewalks, or mending fences for people who never quite met his eyes. The alcohol was a companion as much as a refuge, the ritual of its purchase and the slow burn of its comfort as familiar as the static that hummed through the ancient speakers. Nights at the station blurred into one another, punctuated by the low murmur of distant broadcasts and the sigh of wind against the walls. In that forsaken place, Darrell built a home from the remnants of his own survival, each day running out like sand through his fingers, but at least contained within the walls that neither pitied nor condemned him. Sometimes when the dusk pressed lavender shadows into the radio station's cracked glass, Darrell would climb the hill and look out over the lake, a silver coin nestled in the palm of the land, its surface trembling with the wind. From here, he could see the world as Alicia had demanded it be seen, unhurried, reverent, held in the moment before night fell. He remembered her voice, insistent and laughing as she shoved the keys into his hand, urging him to drive faster so they wouldn't miss the show. They would park at the edge, where the grass gave way to gravel, and the horizon threw itself wide open. The lake caught fire as the sun slid lower, painting every wave and ripple in molten orange and blood red. As the world burned, Alicia would cue up Lake of Fire on the battered car stereo, the song's raw longing washing over them, mingling with the smell of sun-warmed metal and her hair twined with lake air. The music would settle between them, a fragile bridge over all the things they could not say. Now, alone and silent, Darrell looked out upon the darkened lake, the song echoing only in memory. With each evening, the ritual replayed itself. The ache of absence, the relentless beauty of the lake, and the knowledge that some ghosts linger longest in the places where joy once lived. The station was behind him, cold and silent, but the hill, this view, remained the one thing untouched by sorrow, holding the shape of Alicia's laughter and the music that could almost, for a moment, make everything as it once was. Memory whole once again, Darrell slowly walks back up to the radio station, his home. The dead wait for him, but they step aside as he passes, vanishing into smoke as they are nothing more than haunted memories. He pushes open the heavy door, its hinges groaning in recognition, and the hush inside greets him. Not emptiness, but a hush that listens. The dust swirls in the twilight, catching the faded glow of the street lamp outside, and for a moment the air feels thick with possibility. Daryl moves through the familiar maze of cables and dials, his footsteps the only music, while the ghosts slip into the corners, content to leave him to his solitude. He settles behind the soundboard, fingers tracing its battered face, recalling the times he'd spoken into the microphone for no one at all, broadcasting solace into the void, letting static and silence braid themselves together. There is no power here, though, no electricity. The soundboard sits dark and dead, most of it gutted years ago, loose wires spilling out in haphazard directions. A phone with no cord sits on the battered and moldy desk beside him. Daryl is not surprised at all when it rings. He answers, as he always does.
Do you remember now, Daryl?
A voice asks. It is Holden's voice. Holden's voice as he remembers it. Not angry, not accusing, only asking the question he always asks.
Yes, Holden. I remember.
Daryl replies, his own voice cracked and graveled by years of silence and abuse. Outside, the rain begins again as Daryl holds the dead receiver, speaking to his long-dead friend.
Same time tomorrow?
Holden asks.
Yes, Holden. I'll be here. Same time tomorrow.
Daryl answers. He hangs up the phone and looks around his dark and moldy surroundings. He will drink until the memory of tonight is obliterated in a fermented haze, and then he will repeat this night, again and again, pretending to be his old friend for a little while, the friend who could captivate an entire room with his voice alone. He will pretend to be anyone other than himself as much as possible, until what little time he has left upon this earth finally ends. Daryl thinks of the song that they all loved so much, but Alicia especially. He doesn't know if there is an afterlife. He doesn't know if there is a hell and a lake of fire that sits within it. If there is, he imagines that that is where he will go once he shuffles off his mortal coil. This thought does not frighten him, however, because as hard as he tries, he cannot imagine any punishment that hell could offer that can compare to the hell that is a lifetime of grief and regret. Thank you for joining us here at Nightmares Incorporated, and we hope to see you next time when we bring you another original story. Until then, sweet dreams.